The Turner property had always been more than just land. It was a legacy. My grandfather, Samuel Turner, had acquired it after returning from the war when plots of land were still cheap in this part of the country. Back then, the town was little more than a cluster of shops, a post office, and a church with a bell that rang on Sundays. The land itself stretched across low hills and flat meadows, bordered by a wide creek that twisted like a silver snake in the spring sunlight. As a boy, I'd spent summers running barefoot through those fields, fishing in that creek, and watching the fireflies flicker against the backdrop of a sky so dark you could see the whole galaxy. But what made the Turner property truly special wasn't the fields or the woods, it was the dam. My grandfather had built it with his own hands, with the help of neighbors before regulations and red tape had come to choke small-town progress. It wasn't a massive hydroelectric project. It was a simple, sturdy dam of stone and timber, designed to redirect water from the creek into a large reservoir. That reservoir had become the family's lifeline. It provided water for cattle, irrigation for crops, and even a swimming hole for the kids. Over time, as the land passed down to my father and then to me, the dam remained a symbol of self-reliance. It reminded us that we could bend nature to our will without destroying it, that we could carve out a living through grit and sweat. I had lived away for years, working as an engineer in the city, but when my father passed, I came home to inherit what was rightfully ours. By then, the town had changed. The sleepy Main Street had sprouted coffee shops, chain stores, and a sprawling suburban development on the edge of town. People from the city had started moving in, drawn by the promise of country living with modern conveniences. And with them came the cancer that would destroy everything: the HOA. The Homeowners Association had been created for a neighborhood called Willow Creek Estates. It was marketed as luxury suburban living, cookie-cutter houses lined up in neat rows painted in varying shades of beige, with manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. To the developers, it was a dream. To me, it was a nightmare. Willow Creek Estates sat directly on the border of my property, and the HOA board believed they had more power than God himself. At first, I ignored them. Why would I care if they wanted to argue about mailbox heights or trash can placement? That was their prison to live in. My land was separate, free, outside their jurisdiction. At least that's what I thought. The first sign of trouble came on a Sunday morning when I drove past the boundary of my land and saw surveyors hammering stakes into the ground. Curious, I pulled over. A man in a neon vest waved at me like I was trespassing. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, pointing to the stake he'd just planted. "That's my land you're driving into." He glanced at a clipboard. "According to the map, this is part of Willow Creek's Phase 3 expansion." My stomach dropped. "Phase 3? I don't recall selling my land." The man gave me a tight smile, the kind people give when they know something you don't. "Talk to your HOA board. They'll explain everything," I laughed. "I don't have an HOA, never will." He shrugged, hammered another stake, and walked away. That night I found the letter. It had been sitting in my mailbox for a week, a thick envelope with the Willow Creek Estates letterhead. Inside was a declaration that portions of my land, 30 acres to be exact, had been annexed by the HOA under county approval for community development. They planned to build 35 new homes, a park, and a water feature. My jaw clenched as I realized what that meant. They were eyeing my reservoir. I called the county office the next morning. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. "Mr. Turner, according to the paperwork, you never officially registered the dam with the State Water Commission. The reservoir exists in a gray area. The HOA petitioned to repurpose that water source for community use. Legally, their claim stands." "Gray area?" I snapped. "My grandfather built that dam in the 40s. We've been using it for 80 years. "I understand your frustration," she said in a rehearsed tone. "But unless you can provide documentation proving your exclusive water rights, there's little we can do." Documentation. My grandfather hadn't dealt with paperwork. He dealt with calluses and sweat. And now, decades later, I was being robbed because a man who fought for his country didn't think to file the right form. Over the next 6 months, I watched helplessly as bulldozers rolled onto my property. They tore through fields where I'd once played, flattened hills where deer grazed, and carved streets into land that wasn't theirs. One by one, houses sprouted like weeds, soulless, identical structures that mocked the wild beauty of the land. I confronted the HOA president, a woman named Cynthia Walker. She was in her late 40s, always dressed in crisp suits, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun that seemed to strangle her face. Cynthia carried herself like a queen addressing peasants. "Mrs. Walker," I said at a community meeting I hadn't even been invited to, "those homes are on my land. You had no right." She gave me a smile that dripped with condescension. "Mr. Turner, the board followed all the necessary procedures. The county approved the annexation. If you'd like to file an appeal, you're welcome to do so, though I must warn you, our legal team is quite thorough." "Appeal? This is theft." Her smile never wavered. "No, Mr. Turner, this is progress." That word, progress, rang in my ears for weeks. Every time I drove past my land, every time I saw another family moving into a house built on stolen soil, the fury inside me grew hotter. Progress, they called it. To me, it was desecration. Still, I held on to one hope: the dam. No matter how many houses they built, no matter how many rules they enforced, the dam was mine. It sat at the heart of my remaining land, holding back millions of gallons of water. Without it, their reservoir, no, my reservoir, would vanish. Then came the breaking point. It was late spring when I received another letter from the HOA. This one was thinner, colder. It informed me that the board had voted to seize control of the dam for safety reasons and transfer management to the Willow Creek Maintenance Committee. They claimed my neglect posed a risk to the community and that, effective immediately, the HOA would oversee inspections, repairs, and water distribution. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch staring out at the stars, listening to the low rumble of water spilling over the dam's edge. My fists clenched until my nails dug into my palms. They had already stolen my land. Now they wanted my water. I thought of my grandfather, of the calluses on his hands and the fire in his eyes when he built that dam. I thought of my father, who worked himself to the bone to keep the land alive. And I thought of myself watching it all slip away because some smug suburban tyrants decided they could rewrite history. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. If they wanted my dam so badly, they could have it, just not the way they expected. Because when I opened those gates, when I let the water flow free, it wouldn't just be my reservoir they were dealing with. It would be a flood, and floods wash everything away. I didn't act right away. Flooding a neighborhood, no matter how much they deserved it, wasn't something you did on a whim. But once the seed of vengeance had been planted in my mind, it grew fast, wrapping its roots around every thought. Every time I saw those homes gleaming under the sun, those strangers grilling burgers on porches built on stolen soil, I felt the weight of the dam pressing against my chest. The water was my weapon, and patience was my ally. For weeks I walked the property line, watching construction crews finish the last of the houses. 35 in total, each one identical, each one a coffin for the land they'd buried. Driveways shone with new asphalt. Sidewalks glistened under streetlights, and families moved in like settlers claiming someone else's frontier. They smiled, waved politely as if I were just another neighbor. Some even brought over cookies, introductions wrapped in sugar. I refused them all. To them, I was a grumpy old holdout clinging to a chunk of land that would eventually be swallowed by progress. To me, they were invaders. The HOA made sure to remind me of that fact constantly. Letters arrived weekly, complaints about my fence being unsightly, warnings that my overgrown vegetation lowered property values, demands that I cease storing machinery within view of their precious cul-de-sac. Machinery? Those were tractors my father had used, rusting but honorable, relics of real work. I ignored the letters at first, then started burning them in the fire pit. But Cynthia Walker didn't take silence as an answer. One afternoon, she showed up on my porch. "Mr. Turner," she said crisply, her eyes sweeping over the peeling paint on my house as though cataloging sins. "We've received numerous complaints. Your property is becoming a blight on our community." "Our community?" I barked out a laugh. "Lady, you're standing on my land. There wouldn't be a Willow Creek if it weren't for my grandfather." Her expression didn't flicker. "Sentiment doesn't override safety codes." "The dam is unstable. If it fails, it could cause catastrophic damage. That dam has stood strong for 80 years. And it won't stand another 5. She shot back. "Our inspectors have already filed a report." The HOA board voted unanimously to assume control. It's only a matter of time before the county enforces it. Her confidence wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. She'd already stacked the deck. When she left, I went to the dam. I walked across its length, running my hands over the stonework. It was old, yes, but not unstable. My grandfather had built it to last. The timbers were thick, the stone reinforced. It creaked under the pressure of the reservoir, but it always had. Cynthia's so-called inspectors weren't engineers. They were hired guns feeding her narrative. The truth was simple: she didn't fear the dam. She coveted it. That night I sat at my desk with the old lockbox my father had kept under his bed. Inside were photographs of the land, letters from my grandfather, and brittle yellowed deeds. I spread them out, searching for anything that could prove ownership of the water. Nothing. The dam had always been ours in practice, but never on paper. For the first time, I felt the weight of defeat pressing down on me. I couldn't fight them in court. I couldn't outspend them, couldn't outmaneuver their lawyers. Every system I turned to, county offices, lawyers, even old neighbors, shrugged and told me the same thing. They have the paperwork. You don't. I poured myself a drink, staring at the photographs. One in particular caught my eye. My grandfather standing proudly in front of the half-finished dam, sweat streaming down his face, his calloused hands gripping a hammer. The caption on the back, written in his heavy scrawl, said simply, "For the Turners, always, always." That word cut through my despair like a blade. If the system had failed me, then the land itself would be my judge. The decision was made. I would open the gates. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. When the reservoir was at its fullest, when their streets and homes were most vulnerable, I would give the HOA exactly what it asked for: control of the dam. They'd just never control the water once it was free. The days leading up to it felt surreal. On the surface, life went on as normal. The HOA held barbecues in the park, kids rode bikes down the cul-de-sac, and couples walked their dogs past my fence, whispering about the crazy old Turner. I kept to myself, tending my land, fixing my tractor, walking to the dam each evening to feel the hum of water pressing against the gates. But underneath, everything shifted. Every sound was sharper, every detail etched into memory. The smell of cut grass from their manicured lawns, the faint hum of pool filters, the laughter of children echoing across a field that had once belonged to deer. I wasn't just noticing these things, I was recording them, filing them away, because soon they would all be washed away. I began preparing quietly. First, I cleared the path to the release valves, removing brush and debris. Then I tested the mechanisms. Rust groaned against metal. Bolts squealed in protest, but the gears still turned. It would take effort, but the dam could be opened. I checked the water levels daily. Spring rains had been heavy, filling the reservoir to its brim. Each storm that rolled across the hills added to the pressure. By June, the waterline was licking the top of the dam. Perfect. One evening, as I was walking back from the dam, a car pulled into my driveway. Cynthia stepped out, heels clicking against the gravel. Her expression was cold, triumphant. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I wanted to give you one final opportunity to cooperate. The county is scheduled to review our petition next week. Once they approve it, you'll be legally required to surrender the dam." I leaned against my porch post, arms crossed. "And if I don't?" Her smile was thin, cruel. "Then you'll be liable for any damages when it inevitably fails. And believe me, our lawyers will make sure you're left with nothing." For a moment, I almost admired her. She wasn't just playing hardball. She was crushing skulls with it. But admiration turned to steel in my spine. "You think you've won," I said quietly, "but you've made one mistake." Her brows arched. "And what's that?" "You assumed the land would bend to your rules. But this land doesn't answer to you. It never did." She scoffed, got back into her car, and drove away. I watched her taillights fade, and for the first time in months, I smiled. She had no idea. The night I chose was hot and heavy with humidity. Storm clouds were stacked on the horizon, lightning flickering like warning shots. The air smelled of rain, of earth about to be drowned. I walked to the dam with a lantern in one hand and a crowbar in the other. The gears groaned as I pried away the locks, metal clanking against stone. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. This was it. I placed my hands on the massive wheel that controlled the primary gate. For a moment I hesitated. Images flashed in my mind: children riding bikes, families grilling dinner, dogs barking. They weren't my enemies. Not really. They were pawns in Cynthia's empire, but pawns suffer when queens wage war. I turned the wheel. Slowly at first, then harder until my muscles burned and veins bulged against my skin. The dam shuddered, the gears screamed, and then, like a beast released from chains, the first surge of water roared through the gates. The sound was deafening, a thunderous crash that swallowed the night. The reservoir, pent up for decades, surged forward with fury. Water exploded into the creek, foaming and frothing, racing downstream toward the neat rows of houses. I staggered back, drenched by spray, watching the flood unleash itself. It wasn't just water, it was vengeance, history, justice flowing all at once. And as the first streetlights flickered against the rising current, I whispered into the storm, "For the Turners. Always." The roar of the water swallowed the night. It was more than a sound, it was a force, a living thing tearing itself free from captivity. I stood on the dam, lantern swinging wildly in the spray, and watched as the flood tore down the channel, foaming white against the darkness. At first it was exhilarating. The reservoir dropped inch by inch, years of pent-up pressure released in a single savage rush. My chest heaved with adrenaline. I had done it. I had ripped control from the HOA's hands. The water was mine again, wild, untamed, unclaimed. But then in the distance the lights began to blink. From the ridge I could see Willow Creek Estates spread out like a grid of fireflies. Streetlights, porch lights, windows glowing warm against the night. And slowly, like candles snuffed out one by one, they began to flicker. The flood had reached them. For a moment I felt the weight of what I'd unleashed. This wasn't just a symbolic act. The water didn't discriminate between HOA members and their children, between Cynthia Walker's smug grin and the family dog curled on a porch. It took everything in its path. My gut twisted, but then I remembered the letters. The bulldozers. The surveyors driving stakes into my land like it was theirs. Cynthia standing on my porch, threatening to take the last piece of my family's legacy. I gripped the railing of the dam until my knuckles whitened. No. They had chosen this. They had built on land that wasn't theirs. They had stolen, threatened, and laughed at me when I resisted. The flood wasn't my crime, it was their consequence. Downstream, the first screams rose. Car alarms wailed. Dogs barked frantically. Shadows moved in the flickering glow of streetlights as families scrambled. I could imagine the chaos. Parents shaking children awake, water rushing under doors, furniture toppling as currents surged through living rooms, and still, the water rose. I walked along the dam, turning another wheel, opening the secondary gate. A fresh surge thundered out, the current growing more violent. My lantern hissed in the spray, nearly extinguished. My clothes clung to me, soaked through. I felt alive, every nerve sparking with the raw power of it. But vengeance, like floodwater, has no brakes. By midnight, Willow Creek Estates was no longer a neighborhood. It was a lake. Houses stood half submerged, roofs gleaming wet under the lightning. Cars floated, colliding with each other in the currents. The park where the HOA had held barbecues was a swamp. Its gazebo snapped like a toothpick. I imagined Cynthia in her perfect two-story home, standing on the stairs as water rose around her expensive furniture. Did she scream? Did she curse my name? Or did she finally understand what it meant to take something that didn't belong to her? I almost laughed at the thought. The storm finally broke just before dawn. Rain hammered the earth, adding to the flood's fury. The creek had become a raging river, tearing at its banks. Trees toppled, fences snapped, power lines sparked as they crashed into the water. I climbed the ridge overlooking the development, lantern extinguished now, relying on the jagged flashes of lightning. What I saw below was chaos. People clustered on rooftops, waving flashlights, calling for help. Cars clogged the main road, half submerged, their drivers abandoning them to scramble uphill. A police cruiser's siren wailed faintly before sputtering out under the current. And still the water rose. For the first time, fear crept into me. Not for them, but for myself. I had unleashed a force that couldn't be put back in its cage. The dam's gates, once opened, would take hours to close again, and by then the damage would be irreversible. Part of me considered it poetic. The land was reclaiming itself. The reservoir had never belonged to the HOA, never belonged to their tidy rules and regulations. It belonged to the Turners, and now it was wiping clean everything that had defiled it. But another part of me, the engineer, the rational thinker, knew the flood would not stop at Willow Creek. Downstream, the town itself lay vulnerable. Shops, schools, churches, all in the floodplain. By morning, It wouldn't just be 35 homes. It could be hundreds. The thought sobered me. I staggered back from the ridge, rain soaking my face, and returned to the dam. The gates roared with the force of water still surging through. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, straining to turn it shut. But the pressure was immense, far greater than when I'd opened it. The gears resisted, grinding stubbornly. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the dam in ghostly white. For a moment I saw myself as if from outside, a lone man battling against the weight of nature, trying to undo what he had set free. And I knew then, I couldn't stop it. Not completely. The flood had already written its story. By dawn, sirens filled the valley. Helicopters circled overhead, spotlights sweeping across the drowned streets. Rescue boats churned through the currents, plucking families from rooftops. The HOA's perfect suburb had become a disaster zone. From my porch, I watched it unfold. News vans lined the edge of the floodplain. Reporters shouted into cameras, their voices carried by the wind. Historic flooding. Willow Creek estates underwater. Homeowners demand answers. The county sheriff's truck pulled into my driveway by mid-morning. Sheriff Douglas, a broad man with tired eyes, stepped out, rain slicking his hat. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "Turner," he said quietly, "you know why I'm here." I nodded. "Was it you?" His voice wasn't accusing, just weary. I could have lied. I could have said the storm broke the dam, that it was an accident, an act of God. But lies had never sat well with me, and besides, what difference would it make? The water spoke louder than words. "Yes," I said simply. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Do you realize what you've done? 35 homes destroyed. People displaced. If anyone dies in this..." "They built on my land," I interrupted. My voice was sharp, shaking. "They stole it. The dam, the reservoir, it was ours always, and when I fought, no one listened. Not the county, not the lawyers. Not you." His jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he might argue, but instead he just looked away toward the flood. "You'll need to come with me," he said. I didn't resist. At the county jail, reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions. Cameras flashed. "Did you sabotage the dam? Did you cause the flood? Do you have anything to say to the victims?" Victims, that word burned. Who were the real victims here? The families who bought stolen land, or the man whose legacy had been trampled? Inside, they locked me in a holding cell. Hours blurred together. Officials came and went, asking the same questions, repeating the same accusations. My answers never changed. Yes, I opened the dam. No, it wasn't an accident. Why? Because it was mine. By evening, the headlines had already spread. "Local man sabotages dam, Ho neighborhood destroyed Turner. Flood 35 homes lost in retaliation acti. HOA president calls for maximum penalty." Cynthia's face appeared on every screen. Her hair disheveled, makeup smeared, but her voice still sharp as ever. "This man is a danger to the community. He destroyed our homes, endangered our families. He must be held accountable." I laughed bitterly in my cell. Accountable. Where was her accountability when she stole my land? Where were her tears when bulldozers tore through my fields? No, Cynthia had built her empire on theft. I had merely reminded her that nothing built on lies lasts forever. But as night fell, doubt began to creep in. The cell was cold, the silence heavy. For the first time since opening the dam, I was alone with my thoughts. I pictured the children on rooftops clutching their parents, crying in fear. I pictured the old man who waved at me once, now stranded in his flooded living room. Had they deserved this? Or had I condemned innocence to punish the guilty? My grandfather's words echoed in my head. For the Turners, always, always. But what if always had blinded me? What if in defending the land I had destroyed lives? I closed my eyes, pressing my palms against them until I saw stars. The roar of the flood still echoed in my ears, a sound I knew I would carry to my grave. The water had cleansed the land, yes. But it had also stained me, and the reckoning wasn't over yet. The floodwaters receded after 3 days. What had once been Willow Creek Estates was now a wasteland of mud and debris. Houses sagged like broken teeth, drywall crumbling, foundations cracked. Cars lay scattered like toys forgotten by a careless child. The smell of mildew and rot clung to the air, carried by the still swirling currents that snaked through the ruins. I saw it all from the window of my cell. The jail wasn't far from the county offices, and the news played constantly in the break room where guards gathered. Every headline was the same. Turner flood devastates HOA community. They never said HOA built on stolen land. They never said man driven to desperation by corruption. No. I was the villain. The madman. The saboteur, Cynthia Walker, made sure of that. Every press conference she stood front and center, hair pulled back tight again, her voice full of venom. This act of terrorism destroyed our homes, endangered our children, and left dozens of families homeless. We will not rest until justice is served. Justice. That word again. Always theirs, never mine. The trial came quickly. Too quickly. Normally, cases like this took months, years even. But the county couldn't wait. Pressure mounted from every angle. Residents demanding answers, insurance companies calculating losses, politicians scrambling to appease voters. I sat in the courtroom, shackled at the wrists as lawyers paraded evidence. Grainy footage of me at the dam, lantern in hand, crowbar gleaming in the rain. Witnesses testifying about my hostility toward the HOA. Cynthia herself, her voice trembling just enough to play the victim while her eyes still glinted with satisfaction. Mr. Turner is not only reckless, she declared. He is dangerous. He weaponized nature against us. Against families. Against children. The jury watched her with rapt attention. To them, she was a grieving leader. To me, she was a viper coiled in silk. My lawyer, a weary public defender named Harlan, did his best. He argued that the land had been stolen, that I had been provoked beyond reason, that the dam itself had been part of my family's legacy long before the HOA existed. But when the judge asked for proof of ownership, all Harlan had were photographs and oral history. No deeds, no paperwork, nothing that mattered in a court of law. The verdict was inevitable. Guilty of reckless endangerment. Guilty of property destruction. Guilty of criminal negligence, each word struck like a hammer. The only mercy was that no one had died in the flood. Injuries, yes. Homes lost, yes. But no deaths. That single fact spared me from a harsher sentence. 10 years in state prison. The gavel fell. Cynthia smiled. Prison was its own kind of flood. A tide of noise and violence, of men stripped down to their most primal selves. I kept my head down, spoke little, worked in the shop repairing engines. My training as an engineer gave me value, and value gave me safety. But at night, when the noise faded, the memories returned. The roar of the water. The screams in the distance. My grandfather's face in that photograph, proud and unyielding. For the Turners. Always. Had I honored that legacy? Or betrayed it? I wrestled with the question for years. Sometimes I told myself I had done what was necessary, that I had struck back against thieves who thought the law was a shield for their greed. Other times the guilt gnawed at me, whispering that I had punished too broadly, that innocent children still woke with nightmares of rising water because of me. The truth, I realized, was that both were true. I had been right. And I had been wrong. 6 years into my sentence, I received a letter. It came through the prison mailroom, addressed in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. Dear Mr. Turner, it began. You don't know me, but I was one of the families in Willow Creek. My name is Angela. We lost our home in the flood. At first, I hated you. Everyone did. But over time, as we fought the HOA for compensation, I started to learn the truth. They never told us the land had been disputed. They never told us the dam wasn't theirs. They promised us safety, but they built lies on stolen ground. I don't excuse what you did, but I understand why you did it. And I wanted you to know, not all of us see you as a monster. I read the letter a dozen times, my hands trembling. For the first time since that night, someone had seen me. Not just the flood. Not just the headlines, me, I wrote back. And in that exchange, slow and fragile, a crack of light pierced the darkness I'd been living in. When I was finally released, 10 years reduced to 8 for good behavior, the world had changed. Willow Creek Estates no longer existed. The flood had gutted it beyond repair, and no developer dared rebuild on the scarred land. The HOA dissolved, its members scattered. Cynthia Walker had moved to another city, still serving on boards, still tightening her grip on others' lives. My land, what little remained untouched by the annexation, was mine again. Nature had reclaimed the rest. The reservoir was smaller now, the dam partially dismantled by county order, but the creek still flowed. Trees had sprouted in abandoned streets, grass pushed through cracked asphalt. It was wild again, untamed. I stood on the ridge, breathing in the air, and for the first time in years I felt something close to peace. The land bore scars, so did I. But both had survived. People still talk about the flood. Some curse my name, others whisper it like a cautionary tale. A few, very few, see it as a lesson about greed, about what happens when you try to control what was never yours. As for me, I live quietly now. I tend a small garden. I fix old tractors for neighbors who still remember my father. I walk to the creek at dusk and listen to the water's song. Do I regret it? Yes, and no. I regret the fear I caused, the lives I upended. I regret the children who will never forget that night. But I do not regret defending what was ours, because some legacies are worth more than laws, more than progress, more than the neat rows of houses that crumble as quickly as they rise. My grandfather's words still echo. For the Turners. Always. And I finally understand. It was never about winning. Never about vengeance, it was about standing. Even when the flood comes.